What's up, guys? Tim Little, Matt Allen. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin, and welcome back to our Spring Buyer's Guide series. Today's video is video number 3 in the series. Today we are covering everything springtime hard baits.
We are rolling through these buyer's guides. Today, all things hard baits. This is the time of year where people like to expand. They like to try new categories, try new lures, and we wanted to try and narrow it down, help you save some money by showing you the baits that we have a lot of confidence in each category. So there'll be 1, 2, or 3 baits and an entire bait category instead of 100. The video itself is quite large. There are a lot of categories, but each category is really narrowed down. Tim, you want to kick us off? Little overwhelmed? Just grab one and go.
I'm just looking at the different categories. All right, let's talk Lipless. You guys know that we love Lipless. I'm gonna start here if you don't mind.
What if I did?
Yeah.
Still starting there?
Yeah. Still
All
starting
right.
there.
All right.
So the Lipless crankbait category. Springtime is Lipless time, right? These fish are moving up shallow. They're on the flats. They're looking for these spawning bays. And you guys know that we love yo-yoing a Lipless or even just straight retrieving a Lipless. In this category, we got 4 baits for you. First bait, I'm gonna combine these two. This is the Jackal TN70 and the TN60, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's a TN60. This bait, you guys know how much we love other lipless crankbaits. We've talked about it through the years, but this bait is quickly becoming our favorite because it's just got a different sound, and a lot of guys aren't throwing it. You've caught a
Or at least they weren't.
They weren't, yeah. Now, now it's kind of catching on. But this TN70, the TN60, the 50, they're all great baits. They have great sounds. Again, that's that Jackal. This time of the year, in most of the stuff, we're throwing either craw or shad patterns. But you can see right there, that's that TN. Another staple in this category, especially when these fish are going shallow, is going to be the red eye shad. Striking red eye shad. Fairly inexpensive bait in the category, but comes in great colors. It's a lighter bait. Some of the other baits are 3/4 of an ounce. This one is a little bit lighter. I mean, that's a 1/2 ounce. So you can fish it shallower and you don't have to worry about it getting hung up as much. You can get that in the 2-tap or you're rattling. I don't know if you guys can hear that or not. Great sound, fairly inexpensive. And then last but not least, more on the budget end, is gonna be the actual Bill Lewis rattle trap. This bait's been around for decades. It's a proven fish catcher. Yo-yo in, just straight retrieve over the tops of grass as the grass is growing up. That guy right there, the rattle trap, is a must.
All right, let me pick a random category here. Let's do glide baits. Glide baits, all of these categories are hard to narrow it down, but we wanted to just really try and dial in the best of the best. The baits where we're thinking, if a guy listening to us in the South, a guy in the Midwest, a guy in the North agrees and goes out and wants to try that bait, it's going to work for them. These are the baits that are the most reliable in the most situations. That right there is the River to Sea S-Waver 168. That is a bait that we destroy with everywhere. Everywhere we've ever been, that thing has blasted fish. It's incredible how effective it is. And it's not particularly large, right? Look at it compared to a Vixen, a Topwater. It's not a huge bait, even though it's a swim bait, but it catches giant fish. It catches little ones and it catches monsters. Just an incredibly effective bait. The other one that I've got a ton of confidence in is this, the Bait Sanity Antidote. That's the summer shad color. That's my favorite color in the lineup. But again, fairly small profile. These are not large glides. This you can throw on just a regular old jig rod, like a medium heavy or a heavy, and you're fine. This one, you're starting to bridge that gap. You need to be on a larger, heavy style rod or one of your smaller swim bait rods. But both can be fished without a true dedicated swim bait rod, and you can get away with it, which is a huge time saver and money saver, especially for the guy who's just dabbling with swim baits. You want to see if it will work, but you're not all in yet. Both of these are very cost-effective glides. They're highly available and they work.
Yeah, it's important to understand too, all these categories, we've done in-depth videos for each individual category.
Right.
This is not that video today. We're kind of bringing everything together, simplifying it for you. So if you need to go back, and you'll find these different videos in these categories, and in-depth lipless crank, in-depth swim bait. I mean, you did a 2-hour seminar just on swim baits, so we have those videos too if you haven't seen those. Sticking with the kind of the lipless blade bait category, let's talk about these guys right here. So I talked about the lipless. These fish are moving up shallow. The other bait that we like to throw, especially this time of the year, is going to be a version of a blade bait. You got the Demiki Vault and the Megabass Dyna Response. These are our two favorite. Now, the benefit of throwing the blade bait versus the lipless, it's silent. When everybody's throwing a rattle bait, a lipless bait that has a ton of sound, going behind him, downsizing a little bit, you've heard that before, right? Downsizing and throwing a silent bait can work magic. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've fished together on the boat throwing different things, and one day they're eating that and one day they're eating this, and it's usually completely opposite, right? So a blade bait is something you have to add to your arsenal if you're in that lipless kind of blade bait category, and these are our two favorite, the Demiki Vault and the Dyna Response. This has a little bit slower fall with that what is that, Mylar, what's it called, whatever it is.
I think you had it right, Mylar.
That tail, it slows the fall, a little bit different action, but they straight choke this thing. The blade bait is a must if you're doing that style of fishing.
I'm going to stick with the swim bait theme. I'll work my way through here. 2 bluegill profiles, because again, we're talking springtime. And even in the places where bluegill aren't a major food source for the bass, they become a bass's enemy around the spawn. If there are bluegill around, bass are after them, right? They are not getting along. Now, if you're a pond guy or you're in the south and bluegills are a major player in your lake, all the more reason to be throwing them. But there's 2 here. This, again, Bait Sanity. This is their Explorer Gill. This is a glide bait, but it's a true bluegill profile. And it's got a really, really good swim to it. I've been very, very impressed by this bait. Again, totally budget friendly. Now, granted, a budget swim bait is very different than, say, a budget crankbait, right? You might still spend 30, 40 bucks on a budget swim bait, but you're not spending 200, 300
right.
or more. But this bait has a ton of high-end features to it. Like the inside of the joints are silenced. They've got a pad in here that silences it to make it a really, really quiet swim. Super natural, but this bait darts and pops really well. If you want to work that rod tip, you can snap it. And they did a really good job of doing a bluegill profile without being awkward. So often, bluegills are too tall or the fins are too large, and the fish try to eat them and they can't. They bounce off and they have a horrible hookup ratio. This bait, they've minimized all that. It's very thin, not very tall, minimized the fins, and the hookup ratio is really good. As bluegill glides go, I love that bait. And then the other one is a Jackal Gantarelle. I have smashed with this thing over and over and over. The Gantarelle is 2-jointed, but it's a very different action. Where a glide bait, you want to be really aggressive. These 2 baits are like a 1-2 punch, much like a lipless and a blade bait. The glide bait, you've got that aggressive swim, and then you can twitch it and cut it, and it will be really, really darty. The Gantarelle is the opposite. Slow swim, and it just gets this natural little swim, and then instead of popping it, all you do is just stop reeling and slack it. And when you do that, that natural swim just wanders off. And then you pull it back in. Complete reverse of one another. And on any given day, one of those 2 actions is going to smash.
All right, sticking with the shallow water category, let's go ahead and talk about square bills. Start with this guy right here. I've talked about this quite a bit lately. This is the Bill Lewis ATV. Those are Mustad triple grips. They come stock on it, which is cool, having nice hooks on a bait. But this is a bait that Matt has been playing around with for the last, I don't know, a few months or so, and really raving about. So I got to try it out the last few weeks, and I got to say, I agree. This is a bait that has a ton of movement. It's a great shallow water bait, but where this bait shines is coming through cover. This bait, the ATV, it's a 4-wheel drive square bill that is really, really hard to get hung up.
Yeah, you can't get it stuck.
When you have big old trebles on there, it's unheard of to throw that in and around wood and not get hung up, and this guy does it awesome. So that's the Bill Lewis ATV. That's quickly becoming one of our favorite baits in the category. And we've talked about it, and Matt and I, we've talked about it. This category is changing so much in the last few years. There's so many new baits coming to the market that just have really changed that category. Next up, speaking of that, that is the Rocco. All of a sudden it's getting bright. This is a bait that, again, really special bait. It's a bait that starts swimming basically on that initial handle turn. It's a real tight wobble bait, and it's just a bait that kind of in the category we've always had wider wobble, loud baits. This one's a silent bait, but it catches them, okay? So that's a high float, good bait to throw shallow. And then last but not least, the OG Slim, the Ott's Garage Slim. This is a balsa bait, another high float bait. Now the benefit of high float, again, these fish are up shallow, you're throwing in and around stuff, you hit something, you can back it out, let it float out, but this is gonna have a tighter wobble, colder water, something that's gonna, where you're gonna want that little tighter action, if you will, for lack of better terms. But that guy right there, those are our 3 must-haves in this category. Square bills is a giant category. We could probably put 20 or 30 baits in this thing, but it was really hard to narrow it down. But those are baits that are, some of them are new. You're hearing about us talk about them for the first or few times.
Well, now about the 18th time, but it was the first time really recently.
Yeah, this year. So those are all winners right there.
All right, to wrap up the swim baits, let's talk wake bait. Man, I am pumped that we can even bring that term back up, right? We are finally headed into spring, and that brings back Topwater. This is our bait. This is the tactical wake. We designed this bait with River to Sea. It released around ICAST last year. This is a full profiled Topwater wake. So single jointed, big wide lip. This will push a great big V wake. Now we've done dedicated videos on how to fish it, but the concept is you're pushing a V on the surface with that lip, and that bait's just back there clacking behind it. It's got an amazing sound to it, amazing movement. Something we're super proud of with this bait is that it's multifaceted. It has an amazing V wake. It'll push a huge wall of water. The sound that comes out of it when it's in the water is remarkable. But there are a couple other things that it does. One of those things is that it will go so slow, so much slower than all of the other wake baits that I've personally ever fished. I've never found one that can go slower. We can slow this bait down and it's just crawling on the surface. An early season like this, when those big fish are just inching into the shallows, they're not used to all that sound, they're not up there being super aggressive yet, crawling that thing over the top of them on a calm morning can be the deal. And then the reverse is also true, especially post spawn. I like to walk the bait, pop, 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 and this thing will just walk and clack super loud and aggressive. But the way it sits in the water is very level, so it has an excellent hookup ratio. You don't have fish blowing it out of the water. When they take a shot at it, they get it. We're super excited about this bait, and we're stoked to be back at the time of year where it's back in the arsenal and we're waking again.
Absolutely. All right, next category up, I guess it's gonna be mid-range crankbaits. So,
buddy.
And crankbaits that are really good around rock. This time of the year is a must. These fish are moving. We've always talked about moving to shallow. Rock this time of the year is key. That guy right there, that is the Spro rock crawler. That's a bait that really shines around rock, comes in a lot of great colors, a lot of great craw patterns. You know, one thing we talked about earlier is craw and shad, right? Those are kind of the colors that we're talking about as these fish are coming up for the spawn. If you want a good selection of craw colors, look at the Spro rock collar. I mean, there's I don't know, 15, maybe 10, 12, 15 colors of craw to match the craws in your lake. So that's the Spro rock crawler. Again, it's a cold water crankbait. As we transition from winter into spring, that bait really, really shines. Another great one is going to be the Megabass Z2. It comes in a Z2, a Z1, a 2, and a 3. That's the Z2, kind of that mid-range. Again, craw patterns, tight wobble, deflects really well off a rock. That's a good one. And then last but not least, that is the mush bob. That's the Jackal mush bob. Again, see that same craw pattern, that reds, the reds. That's typically the colors we're throwing this time of the year, especially out here.
Oh yeah.
See, bright orange, bright red, but that guy right there. So in that category, it's a category that's not talked about a lot, that mid-range crank category, but those three are lights out.
All right, let me talk about these tail spinners over here. They've been looking at me.
Yep.
The tail spin, I think, is one of the most, we were talking the other day when we talked in the budget video, we talked about those mid divers and how that's one of the most underserved or most overlooked categories. I would say another one where everyone is blowing it is tail spinners. Tail spins smash, and they have been pigeonholed as like a dead of winter bait.
Right.
That's where people put them. It's a year-round bait, and they destroy in the springtime. I think almost everybody underutilizes a tail spinner. I've got 3 here, and they're all completely different. If you're not throwing a tail spin, you should add it to your lineup. This is one of those categories where if you're like, hey, I want to try some new stuff this spring, try a tail spin. You can fish them a lot of ways. You can hop bottom, like we do with the Lipless, hop and bottom. You can also swim them, right? You can straight, let it hit bottom, and then just start winding. Get it up off the bottom and just swim it like a Lipless coming across the bottom, or a spinnerbait, or anything else. You can also fish them down steep structure, and that's how you see a lot of guys fish them in the wintertime, like bluff walls. Throw it up, get it to stick somewhere on that wall, pull it out, let it flutter, and then let it go, and it'll just swim down. All 3 of these very different baits. The Jackal Deracoop is an amazing bait in this category. It is the smallest profile of the bunch, but we have absolutely lit them up with that bait right there. It's a phenomenal bait. Next one up, this is from Freedom Tackle. What I like about this bait is that it's a longer profile. It's a larger overall profile, larger blade, and it's got this big stinger hook, if you will, back there on that blade. They spin, they spin together. That larger profile, larger blade is a much slower fall through the water column. So like a bluff wall situation, that Deracoop will wreck shop, where you pull it out and let it fall down the wall. Pull it out, let it fall down the wall. This bait is more of that, throw it out, let it hit bottom, slow, steady retrieve. You're getting a lot of feedback because that blade is pulling like a spinnerbait does, so you really know it's there. You can feel it's doing its job. And then the last one is this Savage Gear. This is one we reviewed last year. This bait surprised me. I was really glad I took the time to watch it underwater, because this bait is more like a Lipless than any of the others. It actually has that Lipless wobble to it, with that blade back there spinning behind it, pulling against it. It's really a unique action. All 3 of those are killer options. Try any of them. I'm not suggesting you go out and buy an entire box full of tail spins, although I've done that, but try any of them. They're all very, very effective baits, but a tail spin should have a place in your lineup.
It's just a fun bait to fish. Even if you're doing the straight retrieve, the fish just smash it.
They do.
It's easy to fish. All right, next category, we'll stick with the cranks. This is gonna be our deep cranks. Not ultra deep, we're not talking summertime ledge fishing, anything like that. No 10XDs, Azumas. This is springtime cranking. So we're gonna kind of go colder water and work our way into post-spawn warmer water. So starting off, cold water crank, tactical DD crank. That's a bait that Matt and I designed several years ago, has caught teener fish. It's just a staple in our arsenal. Has a real tight wobble, a lot like the wobbles I talked about in some of these other baits, the square bills and such, a tighter wobble. As the water transitions into warmer, you're gonna go with a wider kicking bait. We're gonna talk about that shortly, but that guy right there is a must, especially if you're fishing that cold water. That's where that bait shines. Now, as we transition into a little bit warmer water, we're gonna get a bait that has a little wider wobble. This is the Rapala DT16, and I have smashed on this bait. What I've noticed, especially with live and forward-facing sonar, is this is a bait that has a slower rise, float to it. So when you're reeling and you reel, burn, and you pause, it just slow, almost suspends, just like you're suspending a jerkbait over a fish's face. And I can't tell you how many fish I've caught on the pause, just letting it sit there, and then the rod just loading up because it's suspending in their face. It's not a high float bait, and I've caught a ton of fish just pausing it and letting them eat it. And then last but not least is gonna be the Strike King 6XD. Now this bait's gonna be your bait that you're gonna fish post-spawn into summer, through summer. It's gonna have a lot wider kick. Again, we're not talking about the big Magnum deep cranks, but if you're looking for a deep crank to fish all the way through, actually into fall, that 6XD is a must. It's tried and true, comes in good colors, it's fairly inexpensive, and that guy catches them.
All right, I'm gonna talk jerkbaits. Jerkbaits in the spring is a whole different deal than jerkbaits in the fall or jerkbaits in the winter. For the most part, everything I do revolves around flash, right? You want maximum flash coming off of your bait, and most of the time you want to be up shallow as well. Over the past few years, this bait had just completely taken over for me. This is a Jackal re-range. I've never found a bait that throws more light. When you're ripping it, some baits just sort of, this doesn't. It rolls on the turns. And that's the key. It throws so much light as it does that roll. It's incredible. We've got so much underwater footage of this thing just shining. And it throws that big shine out, and then boom, those fish are on it. It's amazing how many fish we've caught with that bait, specifically in the springtime. Now, was it last year or was it the year before that the World Minnow came out?
Last year, I think.
The World Minnow takes a whole different approach to flash. So this is Shimano's bait here, and it's got flash boost in it. I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but there's a little piece of metal in there suspended, and it floats and it moves even when the bait is still. It's still in there flashing. And that has really changed that game for me. I throw the World Minnow a lot now. Last spring, I was up north in cold water, and that bait just stood out. It was amazing. Those fish would run up on it in clear water. Your twitch, or rip, pause, rip, pause. And on the pause, crystal clear water and smallmouth, I'd see them coming. And normally they'd stop right there, right? They just stop short and they wait. But I would watch these fish stop, and then all I can think is that thing was still flashing in their face, and they just, boom. They'd ambush that thing before I even moved it again. It was really amazing. And then the last one, there are times where I want a bait that will get deeper, especially if I'm reservoir fishing. And if I can only have one, it's such an easy decision. So the Megabass Vision series is incredible. But within that series, the 110 Junior, the downsized one, in the +1. The 110 Junior +1 is just a killer.
It's a standout.
It gets them. That's definitely the one that I would put in the lineup.
All right, I kind of split up this next category. I'm going to go with topwater. We got some topwater baits here.
We'll just call this a warning of what's to come. You take all those, I'll take just this one.
Okay. Topwater this time of the year, as we're transitioning into spawn, post-spawn, those fish are up shallow doing their thing. You know, even bedfish, like throwing and popping a popper over their heads and just letting it sit there can drive bass crazy. But what you want to be cognizant of and think about is you don't want to be throwing a bait that moves too quickly, right? As we're transitioning from cold water to warmer water, as you get into that warmer water, you can throw your buzz baits, you can throw your quick moving baits, but you don't want to be throwing up baits that cover a lot of water from, to you, right? So if you're fishing a whopper plopper, which is a must, slow down, get that good sound, but you're not going to be burning it back to the boat. Give those fish a chance to track that bait and chase it down, but they're not going to be overly aggressive right now. They will as it gets warmer, but that guy right there is a must. So the whopper plopper. This time of the year, I like to throw slower moving topwaters. It doesn't matter if it's a walking bait or a popper. We're going to talk about the different ones in just a second, but a slower moving topwater. Something that goes side to side, but again, it's not covering a lot of distance. So you can work this bait over that laydown where those fish are in staging, but you're not covering too much, taking that bait out of that strike zone. You can just sit there and walk it back and forth. So the Vixen, they're finally back available. I mean, I remember when
it was only like 3 or 4 years that they were out of stock.
The Vixen just has the right? The sound. And they're finally back available, being mass produced again. I mean, I remember when those things were going for like 60, 80 bucks a pop.
Why didn't we sell them all for 60 or 80 bucks a pop? We blew it, man.
On eBay. But this is a great walking bait. Again, great sound. That's what sets this bait apart. And again, it doesn't cover a lot of distance. Now, with that said, if you're a spotted bass fisherman, I say spotted bass fisherman.
Everybody?
I can't even. This bait, the shower blows. This is the 105, right? Yeah, 105.
Yep, the 105 is special.
It's a special size. It comes in 3 or 4 different sizes. The 105 is a little downsized. You got the crumb just basically eating away off this bait. But those open water spotted bass, I can't even tell you how many spots over 4 pounds I caught on this bait alone this year, this last year in the fall. That is a very special size. It's still long enough to have a good walk side to side, but it's not too big where those fish are hitting it and missing it. They're getting 1 or 2 of the baits. Again, it's got a cupped face. So as it's walking, it's spitting, it's throwing a little bit of water, leaving a little bit of a bubble trail, and that's different than a lot of the other topwater baits, okay? So that guy right there is a must. Now on the flip side, a popper. I mentioned it earlier in the beginning of this category, talking about just letting a bait sit above a fish's head. When you know where that fish should be, right? You're fishing a bank and there's the laydown on the point, the fish should be there. Throw that popper out, bloop. Let it sit. Bloop. What's special about this is the Pop Max from Megabass. I don't know if you guys can see it. It's got the cup face like most poppers do, but you can also, there's a hole that allows that air to come through and it creates a bubble trail. So it has an awesome blooping sound. That cup face obviously spits water, but it also leaves a bubble trail. This is a big enough bait that you can walk it side to side. So you can chug it, right? Bloop, chug, whatever, just pulling that bait, or you can twitch, and that thing's just going side to side real quick. But again, it's not covering.
It's like not going anywhere.
It's not
just
covering
hinged.
a water. It's not covering a lot of a distance. So having that big cupped face creates enough resistance to keep that bait kind of in place, if that makes sense. And then another one, a little downsized popper. That's the Demiki D-Pop. It's a fairly just finessey popper, I would say.
It's more like that traditional popper we grew up throwing.
Yeah, and that has a real special sound when you pop it or bloop it. That's going to be your traditional kind of popper sound. It's a smaller profile, so you can see it's quite a bit smaller than that Pop Max. So if you are fishing for those finicky fish, like Matt talked about earlier, as they're moving up shallow, they're not necessarily comfortable up there, and you want to downsize but still throw that top water, that guy right there is a good one.
All right, you were given 5-minute notice that something was coming. This is a bait that I really want to take a minute and talk about. This is the Megabass Karashi. First thing you're going to notice is it's tiny. If you had seen this on Tackle Warehouse in the pictures, there's nothing to tell you how small it is, right? Like, what's something I can compare it to? Here it is compared to a Vixen, standard size topwater walking bait. It's micro. See how small that thing is? I have fallen in love with this bait. I fell in love with it last spring. And I got, I don't know, I went crazy and bought like half a dozen of them because that's all I could get my hands on. And then there were no more. All of a sudden there are tons of them. At least there was, as of this morning there were. I don't know if there will be by the time you see this in a couple of days. But this bait is remarkable. We have, throughout these videos, continued to mention bait finesse, or BFS, and you'll see that especially in the rod videos the next couple of days. That category is erupting. This bait is a shining example of something that fishes incredibly well in that category. I actually fell in love with it on a spinning rod. So let me get to what we actually do with it. I'm obviously all geeked out on it. There's a reason why. This is one of only a handful of baits that I've picked up and fished with where you start throwing it and you're like, okay, I'm seeing how this works. Okay, I'm starting to get the boom, fish eats it. You're like, oh, this is gonna work. Yeah. Let me try that again. Boom, there's another one. Boom, boom, boom. It's one of those baits where it is so obvious. Fish have never seen it. They have never seen the action and they believe it is the real thing. The first day I threw it, I had fish that would literally eat it, miss, turn around, eat it, miss, turn around, jump over the top of it, turn around and swallow it. And I'm not talking one fish, I'm talking fish after fish after fish would eat this thing as many times as it took to get it. It was incredible. Tim and I could think of another day where Tim and I were together. We were up north, sitting in a harbor on Lake Michigan, and there were smallmouth in there. And we had a couple hours to burn, so we were just standing on the dock in this harbor. We just slowly but surely, systematically caught every single fish in the harbor. You'd throw it, all of a sudden you'd get one's attention, right? And they'd start coming in. Next thing you know, they're on it. Boom, they'd eat it. It's incredible. You fish it super light line. I'm talking 4 to 6 pound line, and it's a half top water, half subsurface. Sometimes it's jumping out of the water, sometimes it's just below the surface, but think of it as a micro hard fluke almost. I'm fishing it on extremely light fluoro and extremely light either long spinning rod or a bait finesse rod, and just working super aggressive but super light twitches. Just pop, 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 pause, pop, pop, pause, pop, 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 pause. That's why the fish should be jumping over it, because it's darting and moving and they're coming and completely missing. Turn around, hit it again, turn around, hit it again. This is one of those baits that I believe is going to create its own category. The fact that it's landing at the same time that bait finesse is exploding, I think is one of those magical moments. You will for sure watch us wreck shop with this bait throughout the spring this year and beyond. It's a remarkable bait that I suspect will turn into a category in the coming years.
Yeah, it's a cool little bait. The reason they weren't available was a JDM product.
Yeah,
and that he didn't mention that earlier, but you couldn't get them. So I'm sure you were up late at night searching all the Japanese websites,
just like I always do.
Right. So that's why you couldn't get it. But now they are available here in the States,
here in the U.S.
And it is such a cool little bait. And I agree, it's going to create its own category. Just the way the fish react to it, it's obvious they've never seen anything like it. And now's your chance to get behind something and get to experience. When you can experience fishing with a bait that they've never seen before, there's nothing else like it.
No.
And it goes away eventually, right? When everybody starts throwing the baits, things change. But it's really cool to see how those fish react to that little guy.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Guys, so there is hard baits in a nutshell, kind of flew through it, the different categories, but these baits in these categories catch fish. It's the baits that we have confidence in. That's why we're recommending them to you. Down below in the video description, we'll link all the baits, our favorite colors in the different techniques to make it easy for you guys. You guys can click on the link and see the up close HD pictures and all that good stuff. But that is hard baits, everything from little micro Japanese baits to big old custom top waters that we've designed. Everything in between, narrowed it down for you. What do we got coming up next?
Tomorrow will be, the next 2 days are going to be rods. Tomorrow is going to be budget rods, but this isn't like, hey, let's talk about a couple of budget rods. We recognize that the landscape of this country has changed over the last few months. A lot of people are struggling. Budgets are becoming much more important for a lot of households. So we are taking the same approach that we take to high-end rods. We're taking that to budget rods. We're going to take an in-depth look at budget rods, where the gems are, what the different price jumps mean, to try and save people a bunch of money this year.
Yep.
So we'll do that tomorrow, and then we'll wrap it up with another rod video the day after that. Go for it.
Guys, we appreciate you for watching. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and we will see you tomorrow for budget rods.